Imagine watching your own parents completely sell their unconditional loyalty to your older sister simply because her wealthy husband pays their monthly bills. For my entire life, I was completely forced to live in the dark and deeply suffocating shadow of my older sister, Victoria. My name is Diana, and I am a 28-year-old freelance graphic designer who learned the hard way that toxic families value money far more than genuine love. If you have ever been the scapegoat in your family because you completely refuse to play their toxic financial games, you will absolutely understand my story. In my family, there was one massive unspoken rule that dictated absolutely everything we did. Every single event revolved entirely around Victoria and her marriage to a highly successful commercial real estate developer named Sterling. Sterling was incredibly wealthy, and he effectively purchased the absolute obedience of my parents, Robert and Eleanor. He actively paid their massive monthly mortgage and entirely funded their highly luxurious suburban lifestyle without a single complaint. Because my parents were completely and entirely financially leashed to their arrogant son-in-law, they treated Victoria like absolute royalty. She never had to work a single day in her life, but she was constantly praised. Meanwhile, my parents actively took every possible opportunity to severely belittle my freelance design career and my independent life choices. The toxic judgment only became significantly worse when I fell deeply in love with Julian. Julian was a brilliantly talented but financially struggling sculptor who worked entirely with his hands and his heart. Unlike the wealthy, sterling Julian absolutely could not buy my parents expensive designer gifts or entirely fund their lavish vacations. Because of this, my parents heavily criticized our relationship at every single family dinner entirely, dismissing Julian as a massive financial failure. They explicitly told me I was completely wasting my life with someone who would absolutely never amount to anything. Despite their cruel and entirely calculated dismissals, Julian and I successfully built a beautiful and completely honest life together. We actively moved into a highly cheap rented studio apartment in Portland, where he could carefully sculpt and I could work on my designs. The drafty old building was owned by a remarkably kind and highly observant elderly landlord named Mr. Henderson. While my own family actively looked down on our financial struggles, Mr. Henderson would quietly watch Julian work and offer genuine encouragement. He truly saw the incredible value in our quiet life long before my toxic family ever realized they were about to completely lose me forever. Despite the heavy judgment from my parents, Julian and I found absolute peace in our quiet life. And that peace reached a beautiful peak on a snowy evening, when Julian finally proposed. There was no flashy spectacle, and absolutely no massive diamond ring bought with family wealth. He simply looked at me with his quiet, focused intensity, and asked me to be his wife. It was the most genuine moment of my entire life. We immediately began planning our dream wedding. We absolutely did not want a massive, expensive ballroom event just to show off to strangers. Instead, we meticulously planned a beautiful, highly intimate garden ceremony right on the quiet Oregon coast. I carefully hand-painted every single invitation, and we mailed them out to our family members several months in advance. We wanted to ensure absolutely everyone had plenty of time to clear their schedules. But let me pause here and ask you a highly personal question. Have you ever known someone who is fundamentally incapable of letting another person be the center of attention, even for just one single day? If you have, then you already know exactly who my older sister Victoria is. I truly should have known a massive storm was coming when Victoria did not complain about my wedding date. She simply stayed entirely silent. And in my toxic family, silence from the golden child is absolutely never a good sign. Just 3 weeks before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, I received a casual phone call from my aunt that completely knocked the breath out of my lungs. My aunt asked if I was planning to attend Victoria's baby shower before my wedding ceremony. I stood there in my studio, completely paralyzed. Victoria had intentionally scheduled an incredibly extravagant baby shower at an elite country club on the exact same day and at the exact same hour as my wedding. The venues were several hours apart, making it physically impossible for anyone to attend both events. I immediately called Victoria, my hands violently shaking. I desperately hoped it was just a massive misunderstanding, but her voice on the phone was entirely cold, bright, and completely rehearsed. She aggressively claimed that the elite country club only had that specific date available, and she simply could not move it. She coldly dismissed my broken feelings, treating my carefully planned wedding day like a casual brunch appointment that I could easily reschedule to accommodate her high society aesthetic. She actually had the absolute nerve to tell me that I could have a wedding anytime, but this was her first baby. It was the ultimate act of deliberate, calculated sabotage, designed entirely to force our family to choose between us. After that devastating phone call with my sister, the psychological manipulation rapidly escalated. Victoria did not just send out expensive invitations and leave it to chance. She executed a highly calculated and deeply cruel campaign designed to entirely isolate me on the most important day of my life. My best friend actually showed me exactly what was happening behind my back. Victoria personally called every single relative in our family. She did not send a casual group text. She made individual and highly surgical phone calls to pull every single person to her side. During these private calls, she subtly threatened them. She made it incredibly clear that choosing my simple garden wedding over her extravagant baby shower would deeply insult Sterling and his incredibly wealthy family. And my family, driven entirely by greed and the terrifying prospect of losing their financial lifeline, completely caved without a single fight. Week after week, I watched my mailbox as one by one, every single relative checked no on their RSVP cards. Have you ever realized that the love of your own family actually comes with a massive price tag attached to it? It is a deeply terrifying truth to wake up to. But the absolutely most devastating betrayal did not come from my aunts or my cousins. It came directly from my own parents. When I called my mother desperately hoping she would finally stand up for me, she coldly told me to simply postpone my wedding. She acted like my entire future with Julian could just be paused so my sister could open luxury presents. Then there was my father, Robert. Months earlier, he had proudly promised to walk me down the aisle. I held on to those words so tightly because I desperately wanted him to choose me just once. But on the actual morning of my wedding ceremony, while I was sitting in my room trying to breathe, my phone buzzed. In a brief and deeply cowardly phone call, my father backed out. His voice sounded completely hollow as he told me the shower started at noon and he simply could not make the drive to my venue. My own father explicitly chose to stand around eating finger sandwiches with his wealthy son-in-law rather than witness his own daughter's vows. 8 seconds of silence on that phone call completely destroyed the entire foundation of my childhood. After that devastating phone call with my father, I simply set my phone down on the counter. I did not scream and I did not cry. I just felt this deep and completely hollow silence wash over my entire body. When I finally arrived at the breathtaking coastal garden venue in Oregon, the visual reality of my family choosing to abandon me was absolutely heartbreaking. Julian had spent weeks meticulously building a beautiful wooden arch for us to stand under, and we had carefully arranged exactly 42 wooden chairs on the green grass. But as I stood there in my simple white dress looking out at the rows, I saw the physical evidence of their horrific betrayal. 35 of those chairs sat completely empty. The cold ocean breeze actually moved through the empty rows, making the massive silence feel even louder. Only 7 people bothered to show up for the most important day of my life. Let me ask you something right now. Have you ever felt the crushing weight of an empty room? Standing there, looking at 35 empty chairs felt exactly like a physical bruise on my heart. The 7 people who did come were our incredibly loyal friends and Julian's artistic peers, but not a single person who shared my blood was sitting in those seats. As the gentle string music began to play, signaling that it was time for me to walk down the aisle, I faced the terrifying prospect of taking that long walk completely alone. My best friend offered to walk with me, but I told her she belonged up front. I took a deep breath and prepared to take the very first step by myself. But then I heard footsteps directly behind me, slow and very steady footsteps. I turned around and I completely lost my breath. Standing right there was our elderly landlord, Mr. Henderson. He unexpectedly arrived impeccably dressed in a beautifully tailored vintage navy 3-piece suit. This was the quiet and remarkably kind man who owned our cheap rented studio. He looked at me with such profound kindness in his eyes. He fully recognized the immense pain caused by my father's cruel absence. He gently stepped forward and extended his arm to me. He softly told me that since my biological father was not there, someone who actually valued my true worth should have the absolute honor of walking me down the aisle. Something completely broke open inside my chest in that exact moment. Mr. Henderson stepped up as the fiercely loyal father figure I truly deserved but never had. I proudly took his arm, and as we walked down that grassy aisle together, the 7 people in those chairs stood up. I looked at Julian waiting for me at the end of the aisle with tears in his eyes. And as we exchanged our beautiful vows, surrounded only by the 7 people who genuinely cared about us, I finally realized something incredibly powerful. A true family is absolutely never defined by shared blood. A true family is strictly defined by the loyal people who actively choose to show up for you when you need them the most. In the days immediately following our deeply emotional wedding, Julian and I returned to our small rented studio in Portland. We were absolutely exhausted, but our hearts were completely full. We had no massive luxury honeymoon planned, and our bank accounts were practically empty. But as I watched my new husband quietly sculpting in the soft morning light, I felt incredibly wealthy. Have you ever looked around your simple life and realized that having genuine love is worth far more than any amount of money? That is exactly how I felt. But the universe has a truly beautiful way of rewarding the people who stay honest. Just 2 weeks after we exchanged our vows, our elderly landlord, Mr. Henderson, invited us upstairs to his apartment for a cup of coffee. He sat us down at his small wooden kitchen table, and he placed a heavy cardboard box right in front of us. He looked at Julian with a very serious expression, and he softly said there was something he should have told us a very long time ago. He slowly opened the box. Inside were dozens of glossy exhibition catalogs, prestigious art magazines, and old photographs of Mr. Henderson standing next to world-famous artists. My jaw completely dropped. Mr. Henderson was not simply a kind old man renting out cheap art studios to struggling creatives. He was actually a legendary, highly respected art dealer who had successfully run one of the most prestigious galleries in New York City for over 2 decades. He had spent his entire career learning the exact difference between good art and extraordinary art. And he looked right at my husband and told him his work was truly once in a generation. But that was not even the biggest shock. Without us ever knowing, Mr. Henderson had secretly been compiling portfolios of Julian's beautiful sculptures and paintings. Several months before our wedding, he sent that portfolio directly to a man named Arthur Vanguard. Arthur Vanguard is an elite tech billionaire and one of the most globally renowned art collectors in the entire world. Mr. Henderson folded his hands on the table and calmly explained that Arthur Vanguard was so deeply captivated by Julian's work that he had immediately purchased several pieces for exactly $85,000. I literally stopped breathing. I sat there in that small kitchen, completely frozen. But Mr. Henderson was not done. He handed Julian a thick legal folder. Arthur Vanguard was officially offering Julian a breathtaking $450,000 commission contract, along with a guaranteed solo exhibition at a top-tier gallery in the city. Can you even begin to imagine the intense emotion of that exact moment? My toxic family had just thrown me away like absolute garbage, entirely because they believed Julian and I were massive financial failures. They explicitly chose my sister's wealthy husband over my own wedding day. And yet, sitting right there at that small kitchen table, our entire reality had beautifully and profoundly transformed. Our painful financial struggles were entirely erased overnight. We were completely free. And the absolute best part of this entire situation was that my toxic parents and my arrogant sister had absolutely no idea what was about to happen next. A week after we signed those unbelievable contracts, our entire world shifted again. The phone rang while Julian was painting, and the man on the other end was Arthur Vanguard himself. His voice was warm and entirely unhurried. He softly told Julian that he understood we absolutely did not get the beautiful wedding celebration we truly deserved. He explained that his private 180-foot luxury superyacht was currently docked in Italy, and then he offered us an unbelievably generous gift. He wanted Julian and me to spend 10 full days sailing along the breathtaking Amalfi Coast for our official honeymoon. He called it a simple thank you to formally build their professional relationship. Let me pause and ask you to really picture this for a second. Can you imagine going from eating cheap pasta in a freezing rented studio to suddenly packing your bags for a superyacht owned by a billionaire? I actually panicked and almost told Julian to decline the incredible offer because my family had conditioned me to feel entirely unworthy of nice things. But then I remembered the 35 empty wooden chairs at my wedding. I remembered my own father explicitly choosing a country club baby shower over walking me down the aisle. And in that exact moment I realized I was completely done making myself small just so my toxic family could feel big. So I looked at Julian and I proudly said yes. We flew to Italy, and when we stepped onto that massive yacht, I completely broke down in happy tears. We happily traded our highly modest studio for cold marble floors, private chefs, and incredibly elegant dinners with elite European art curators. Every single night we sat on our private balcony watching the dark Mediterranean water turn to absolute gold. For the very first time in my entire life, I was surrounded by highly influential people who actually saw the immense value in what Julian and I had built together. On our very final evening, we were standing on the upper deck surrounded by a stunning Italian sunset. I realized I finally had the absolute power to quietly reclaim my own narrative. I am not a social media person at all, but I pulled out my phone. I took one single, highly elegant photograph. The image showed Julian and me looking incredibly happy and completely at peace on the beautiful wooden deck of that massive luxury yacht. I did not write a long, angry paragraph. I did not tag my toxic sister or aggressively complain about my parents. I just wrote a very simple caption expressing my immense gratitude for the 7 loyal people who actually showed up to support us on our special day. I pressed post and I turned my phone completely off to enjoy my last night. I had absolutely no idea that one single photograph was about to completely shatter the fake reality of my toxic family. When I woke up the very next morning, the warm Italian sun was pouring into our beautiful cabin. I could hear the gentle sound of the ocean moving against the massive superyacht. I rolled over and reached for my phone completely out of habit. The exact moment I looked at the screen, I realized that my single photograph had completely shattered the towering fake reality of my toxic family. My screen was an absolute wall of notifications. I actually had to scroll for a very long time just to reach the bottom. There were exactly 417 missed calls and frantic text messages waiting for me. Let me pause right here and ask you to really let that specific number sink in for a second. 417. The exact same family members who absolutely could not be bothered to send me one single congratulatory text on my actual wedding day were suddenly desperate to connect with me. And why did they suddenly care? Because they saw an unimaginable display of wealth and they desperately wanted a piece of it. If you are listening to my voice right now, I genuinely want to know what you would have done in my exact position. Would you have answered those frantic calls, or would you have completely ignored them? Tell me in the comments below, because I truly want to know how you would handle this massive betrayal. I sat on the edge of that huge, comfortable bed and I clinically read through the deeply hypocritical messages. My father Robert had violently blown up my phone, begging me to call him back immediately. He demanded to know whose yacht we were on and why I never told him Julian was so incredibly successful. My mother Eleanor left multiple voicemails desperately demanding that we throw a massive family celebration party the minute we got back home. She actually wanted to celebrate the exact same marriage she had coldly told me to postpone just a few weeks earlier. But the absolutely most sickening message came from my arrogant brother-in-law, Sterling. The very man whose money had completely bought my parents' loyalty was now pathetically trying to use me to network with my newly successful husband. He actually asked for Julian's high society business contacts. Operating from a place of absolute power and total peace, I slowly read every single one of those desperate messages, and then I did the most satisfying thing I have ever done in my entire life. I put my phone back on silent, and I chose to completely ignore every single one of them. After I completely ignored every single one of those desperate messages, we returned home from Italy. We did not say a single word to my family. We just went back to our quiet life and entirely focused on Julian's highly anticipated solo art exhibition in the city. When the opening night finally arrived, the prestigious gallery was completely filled with elite art collectors, curators, and critics. But as I stood there in a simple black dress, I was only focused on one specific thing. Right in the center of the massive room was the absolute centerpiece of the entire exhibition. Julian had spent months secretly working on this breathtaking and deeply emotional masterpiece. He painted our beautiful garden wedding ceremony exactly as it happened. The massive canvas beautifully captured the soft afternoon light, the delicate wooden arch, and the 7 loyal guests who actually showed up to support us. But more importantly, he perfectly painted the 35 glaringly empty wooden chairs left behind by my toxic family. He simply titled the massive piece after our exact wedding date. Let me tell you the absolute power of turning your deepest pain into something incredibly beautiful. That highly emotional painting was instantly purchased by our billionaire patron Arthur Vanguard for exactly $120,000 before the gallery doors even opened. But the money was absolutely not the most important part of that night. The heartbreaking story behind that specific painting caught the attention of a reporter from a major national newspaper who was attending the event. When he publicly asked Julian what the 35 empty chairs meant, Julian did not hesitate or try to protect my toxic family. He looked right at the reporter and told the absolute truth. By the very next morning, our painful story was published for the entire country to read. The article explicitly detailed how my own family cruelly abandoned me on my wedding day, just to attend a luxury baby shower. Can you even begin to imagine the absolute panic in my parents' house when they opened their morning newspaper? The towering and completely fake high society reputation that Victoria and my parents had spent years carefully building was entirely destroyed right in front of their elite peers. Victoria's wealthy country club friends suddenly started asking her uncomfortable questions. For my entire life, my family tried to make me feel completely invisible, but on that morning they were the ones who had absolutely nowhere to hide. After the massive newspaper article entirely exposed my toxic family to their elite peers, you might think the story was finally over. But the universe has a highly fascinating way of delivering a massive dose of instantaneous karma exactly when it is needed the most. Have you ever noticed how quickly a beautiful house of cards completely collapses when the wind finally changes direction? Just 2 months after the devastating art exhibition, my family experienced a completely catastrophic financial collapse. For my entire life, my mother and father completely bowed down to my arrogant brother-in-law Sterling simply because he had money. His massive commercial real estate company was the exact reason they abandoned me on my wedding day. But suddenly that massive wall of wealth completely vanished. 2 of the largest development deals Sterling was managing completely failed and his financing entirely collapsed. His prestigious company abruptly filed for bankruptcy protection. And overnight, the highly toxic power dynamic of my entire family was completely obliterated. The absolute first thing to go was the financial leash controlling my parents. For years, Sterling had been quietly paying the incredibly expensive monthly mortgage for my parents. He had given my mother a luxury credit card that funded her entirely fake high society lifestyle. But within weeks of the bankruptcy filing, all of that completely stopped. The mortgage payments vanished, and the credit cards were immediately declined. My parents, who had callously thrown their own daughter away just to protect their comfortable retirement plan, were suddenly pushed to the terrifying brink of entirely losing their beautiful suburban home. And then there was my older sister Victoria, the ultimate golden child who had spent her entire life aggressively demanding the spotlight and looking down on my simple life. She had never worked a single day, and she treated my wedding like a casual inconvenience because of her elite country club status. But reality hit her incredibly hard. The luxury cars were suddenly gone. Victoria was violently forced to quietly sell her expensive designer bags and her heavy diamond jewelry on luxury consignment websites just to survive the month. The highly curated and completely fake image she had spent years building was entirely shattered. Let me ask you a very honest question right now. Do you believe that people eventually get exactly what they put out into the world? Because I watched from a place of complete peace as the exact people who callously abandoned me for money were suddenly left with absolutely nothing. They traded their own flesh and blood for a temporary luxurious lifestyle, and in the end, the universe took it all away. Julian and I were sitting safely in our beautiful new reality, while their completely fake world burned down to the ground. While their entirely fake world was completely falling apart, Julian and I used our incredible artistic success to build something entirely real. We officially purchased a beautiful sunlit home on the coast, and the absolute best part is that we paid for it entirely in cash. We did not accept a single cent from my toxic parents or rely on anyone else. There were absolutely no financial leashes and no hidden strings attached. We were finally completely free. A few months after we moved in, my humbled father finally drove out to our new house. He stood on my front porch looking completely broken and offered a genuine apology for his massive cowardice on my wedding day. I let him speak, but I firmly maintained my ironclad boundaries. I looked him right in the eyes and let him know that his cruel actions had permanent consequences. Forgiveness is absolutely not a free pass to return to the way things were. As for my older sister Victoria, I refused to play her toxic games anymore. I forced her to formally admit her cruel and jealous sabotage in writing before I would even consider speaking to her again. I needed her to explicitly admit on paper that she intentionally tried to ruin my wedding out of pure jealousy. Looking back at my incredible journey from standing alone in front of 35 empty chairs to building this truly beautiful life, I have learned a profound, ultimate truth. I want you to listen very closely to this because someone listening right now really needs to hear it. Establishing ironclad boundaries is absolutely never a cruel betrayal to your family. It is a brilliant and highly necessary act of self-preservation. You see, true self-respect is the absolute quietest and most powerful form of revenge. You do not ever have to scream or fight or try to burn their world down. You just have to completely stop setting yourself on fire just to keep toxic people warm. If my story resonated with you today, I want you to remember that you are never entirely trapped. If you have ever been the scapegoat or the one sitting in the empty chairs while someone else got the full room, I completely see you and your feelings are entirely valid. Please take a quick moment to like this video, share it with someone who really needs to hear this empowering message today, and hit that subscribe button right now to join our amazing community. And before you go, drop a comment below and tell me honestly, would you have ever forgiven Victoria and my parents after what they did? I read every single comment and I absolutely cannot wait to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for letting me share my story with you.